for joining me for the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm your host, Howie Jacobson. Today, for the first time in the history of the Plant Yourself podcast, I am republishing an old episode. And it's one that I recorded in 2018, so it's almost 5 years old. And it's with Simon Marshall and Lesley Paterson. And we talked about their book, Becoming a Brave Athlete. And I was rereading the show notes for that episode. It turns out there's a lot of salty language, so this is definitely not safe for work. But the reason I'm bringing it up now is basically to name drop and coattail, because Lesley Paterson, turns out, just won a BAFTA, which is a word with 5 letters in it. That's something, the B stands for British, and it's something about film and theater. And she wrote a screenplay. And when Lesley retired from triathleting and athleting, she's like, I'm going to become a screenwriter. And people are like, yes, dear, that's nice. And well, damn, but she did it. So that was just in the news last week. I emailed her to congratulate her, and she emailed back. So she still remembers the people who helped her along the way. And I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation about how each of us can think of ourselves as an athlete. And I would like you to listen to it the way I'm re-listening to it with Lesley's new accomplishments. Like, it's not just about running or lifting weights or playing a team sport. It's about how do you bring out the best in yourself in every endeavor, in every situation. So without further ado, Simon Marshall and Lesley Paterson, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thanks, Howard. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Howard.
Yeah, so let's get this out of the way at the very beginning. This is going to be an explicit episode with a little E next to iTunes. So anyone who's listening who wants to bail now or plug the ears of small children, because your book is called The Brave Athlete, Calm the Fuck Down and Rise to the Occasion.
Well, although to be fair, we have redacted the U, so it could be feck or fock.
I'm embarrassed that my mind went there now.
Oh,
I know.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because our publisher, we had, I won't say we had a fight with our publisher, but they weren't so keen initially on having a curse word on the title of a book that they're trying to sell. And I think we convinced them that it wasn't just for gratuitous sake, but there's a reason that we use explicit language, because sport often brings that out in us.
Right. I think I saw a study recently that said that people who curse tend to perform better.
And it's funny because and there's been some quite a lot of research actually on use of taboo language generally. And yes, your pain tolerance increases if you swear almighty, during something that hurts. But also, it's a myth, that people who swear have a smaller vocabulary. So that's another myth. So it isn't just a sign of that you don't have other words that you can use instead. So we stick by our swearing, goddammit.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, why would you give up condiments just because fruits and vegetables exist?
Oh, I like that. Can we steal that one?
It's all yours. So this book is so interesting and funny and helpful, and so let's start with the very first question that I had, which is, so who is an athlete? And who is not an athlete? And how do you know if you're an athlete?
He's bloody well not an athlete.
You see, we have this works itself out in our marriage as well. It's one of the big issues that we find with people who are training and they look like athletes, they sound like athletes, but they don't call themselves athletes, or they just say, "Oh, I'm just a this, that, that." It's to do with identity. So your athletic identity is the sort of the beliefs and opinions you have about your own athleticism, whether you can even feel comfortable calling yourself an athlete or other people refer to you as an athlete. So it's partly to do with what you do, like you train and compete and so on, but it's also about how you see yourself. So it's not as simple as saying you're either an athlete or not. I mean, many folks who we know who train and compete a lot, they still don't consider themselves athletes. And likewise, we know lots of people who sit on the couch and don't do any training and they consider themselves athletes. So it's a combination of behavior and mindset.
And I mean, my assumption is that there's no one on the planet who is precluded from calling themselves an athlete, right? That, like we have these fixed identities, and you talk a lot about your identity and self-concept and self-esteem and schemas in the book. But like, if we're human, then to some extent we are athletes, right? Because we come from a long line of critters who had to like run and jump and do all sorts of physical things in order to survive.
Well, I think it comes down to if you're out there and you're exercising, I'd say that if someone is completely sedentary, and they're sitting down the whole day, they're not partaking in any exercise of any form, I wouldn't call them an athlete. But if they're doing any kind of exercise, whether it's fast walking, even whether it's out at the gym twice a week, I would say that's an athlete. Anyone that's participating in physical activity. So that would be my perception of it. But for too often people think that they have to be completing an Ironman in order to call themselves an athlete, or they're completing a marathon, or they're not an athlete. Whereas we coach and are around many people that are training and competing in a 5K or a 1 mile run or something like that, and I would still call them an athlete.
Yeah, and I think again, there's no one answer to this. I would layer on to the what you do to that is that usually there's a sense of sort of volitional competition, right? You enter yourselves into an environments where you're going to be compared to other people, your performances are so, and that's usually, we're now in the realm of sports, so that usually is the kind of added that makes turns an exerciser or a fitness enthusiast into an athlete. Usually that they're now competing, and it doesn't mean that you're sort of entering races to try and win. But I mean, when you are putting a number on, or you're doing something where your performance can be compared to other people, that kind of is the threshold for me anyway, as of being an athlete.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So when you're saying that that some people are athletes and some people are not, it's a choice, right? It's not a sentence.
And it's a choice. It's not even just a sentence. It's actually about the fact that when folks begin and they start training, or they start devoting discretionary time to systematic preparing, then when you decide that it's part of your identity, in other words, that you now think of yourself as an athlete and other people think of you as an athlete, because athletic identity has both an inward and an outward component to it, then you become an athlete. So unlike, there are lots of people who are doing all the things that athletes do, but say they're not athletes. Well, guess what? They're an athlete. They just haven't yet been able to embrace that as part of their identity.
Right. Because, I work with a lot of people who come to me because they want to lose weight, and sometimes lose lots of weight, like they're 350, 400 pounds. They have never seen themselves as athletes. And one of the turning points, like I can get them eating right for a while. I can get them to, put on some shoes and go for a walk. But at a certain point, the ones who it dawns on them, I'm an athlete, even though I don't look like what I think an athlete looks like, but like that's my inheritance as the owner of a human body. Like those are the people for whom it becomes a success, a whole new identity. And it affects everything, not just the training, but it affects their mindset. It affects their ability to make food choices. And there's something about when that identity switch of athlete flips on that I see all sorts of really magical and compoundingly powerful things happening.
Exactly. And when these sorts of thoughts and things you have about how you see yourself start to shift towards that new identity, whether it's an athlete or what have you, we know that your other choices that you make also start to conform to that identity. So having an athletic identity, this is one of the reasons why so many behaviors that are good for our health are correlated, right? So as you become fitter, you make better food choices, and there's research to show that. So it's all part of a sense that how you think about your own health has started to shift. So I think that's really important, that we try and get people to encourage, or we try and get them to change that sort of sense of self alongside those behaviors that they're making, because we know it's going to have some knock-on effects that are going to be really helpful for them as they tackle their new self.
Right. I love that other choices conform to our identity, because I see so many people for whom they're basically plate spinning, right? They've got a whole list of things that they have to do now. And every day they have to get up and battle decision fatigue to do those things, as opposed to, oh, this is what I do because this is who I am.
Exactly. That's a great way of putting it.
It's really funny because people often say to me, I've had a very strong athletic identity literally since I was out the womb. And and people, will often say to me, gosh, how do you do it? How do you get up every morning and do this? And I said, I try and simply say to them, listen, this is part of my DNA. It's as easy to me as brushing your teeth, brushing my teeth might be to you, sort of a thing. And I try and put it in those terms because for me that's, it's easy. It doesn't actually require that much motivation. I'm incredibly lucky in that regard. So for sure, once you have adopted that identity, it's easier to buy into what it takes to do it.
So you didn't just write a book about being an athlete, you wrote about being a brave athlete. So, and I know it comes out of your experience personally and experience coaching many people through Braveheart. Why is that important? Why does a book need to be written showing athletes how to be brave?
Yeah, well, so there's a couple things. One is that we, through our experience with coaching athletes, who are humans first and athletes second, I guess, is that we've seen that many of them struggle with the same things. And one of the universal things that people struggle with is having thoughts and feelings that they don't want. And some of those can be about their sport, but about their jobs, about their relationships, about whatever. But we focus on the thoughts and feelings that people don't want about their athletic life. And so when you start to unpack some of those thoughts and feelings, and they might be related to feeling anxious or not wanting to be judged or not wanting to be embarrassed or humiliated or shown up in front of other people, or they get really nervous. I mean, one of the things that all of these things have in common is that they don't want to feel like that. They want to enjoy this thing that is supposed to be for fun. So we try and get people to say, okay, what does it mean to actually tackle things that scare us or are challenging or that we're worried about being judged or evaluated? And how do we do that with a little bit more enjoyment and confidence? And what it takes actually is not to, and we now know this through some of the psychological research, is that what it takes is not to pretend those things don't exist or to try and fight them and beat them into submission so that you only step onto the field or the pitch or the track when you actually feel very confident, free of any worry of negative with no negative self-talk. And we know that's not realistic. We all have human brains, and we do things when we're scared all the time. We're scaredy cats, right? And there's a good evolutionary reason why that's very protective to feel like that. So being a brave athlete to us is first and foremost the implicit assumption that you're going to feel things that you don't want to feel, and that's okay, and you can jump and try it anyway. So it's learning to kind of step hand in hand with your fears, your worries, your insecurities, and then learn to know that they're probably not going to ever disappear completely, but you can still enjoy it with those feelings if you understand why you're having them. So that to us is really what being brave is all about. It's like embracing and accepting that you have dissenting voices in your head and being able to coexist with them rather than fight against them.
Mm-hmm. Does it surprise people when, Lesley, you say that you have those thoughts and voices too because of your persona? It was Patty McGinty, the one who stares down fear.
Yep, very much so, very much so. I think, people look at someone like myself or other professionals and they put us on a pedestal and they think that it's all easy and that, everything just, is simple and you feel great all the time. You never have any negative thoughts. And it's absolutely not true. I have as many negative thoughts as your sort of average amateur athlete, and even more so. There's a lot of pressure there. There's a lot of expectation. So it's almost heightened in a way. So yeah, I've been through many, many ups and downs on this roller coaster journey, both through the successes and through the failures. So as soon as I express my greatest fears and doubts, I think that level of empathy is what draws people in and makes them realize that, hey, if she can do it, I can do it, kind of a thing.
So now would probably be a good time to ask you to tell your story, or maybe it's the second best time after 10 minutes ago. But the book does start with enter Lesley sobbing, and he can go fuck himself. I assume it's the same replacement of the asterisk. So can you kind of put that in context and tell us your story?
Yeah, I was pretty competitive very, very young, and was in the national team for triathlon, the Great Britain team, the Scottish team, the whole bit, and had massive aspirations to go to the Olympics, really since the age of 4, if I'm honest. So, this was this massive, massive dream, and being in that squad, it was very tough. It was very data driven. Everything was by numbers. The coaches didn't really know how to speak to me. There was really no great sort of emotional touch points with any of the coaches. And as a sort of 15, 16-year-old girl, that was tough, I was constantly told that I wasn't good enough, that I would never make it, and my numbers showed that, and yet I had this great drive to want to, and this huge, huge passion, and it caused me to retire from the sport at the ripe old age of 20, and essentially see myself as a big failure and move on to other things that could enrich my soul again and help me find passion again, because that's what I'd lost. So I went into drama and theatre and acted in a bunch of student films and independent horror films and lots of crazy things. And by way of that, just kind of found myself, if you will, and gained the confidence to know that this was going to be, if I was going to be successful as an athlete, it had to be my journey. And I'd been told that I had to act like other people and be like other people and train like other people to be a champion. Well, I wanted to do it my way. And that's how I, found Xterra, found the love of it, and gained success. I found my own path to get there, and that's what brought me 3 world titles, but not without its many, many ups and downs. But luckily, having a sports psychologist as a husband, I was able to kind of come home and crying and weeping and filled with drama, and have someone to at least explain what was going on and why, and give me some ways to help me get better.
And you've got to remember as well, Howard, that at the elite level, many of the coaches are exercise physiologists or they're sports scientists trained, and it's no fault of their own. I mean, I'm casting a sweeping generalizations here, but it's no fault of their own. But when you look at the training of coaches or in coach education, there's so little regard given to bedside manner, for want of a better word, teaching the skills of empathy and delivering harsh feedback with compassion, so that that it's coming from a place where they're supporting you and trying to move you forward, versus the very data driven, which is, Lesley would have races where she would get, after the coaches, some of the coaches wouldn't even talk to her after races, or if you hadn't had a good race, and the only debrief you'd get would be an Excel spreadsheet or something. And it's quite dehumanizing, that, because we've got to remember that athletic potential and reaching athletic potential is far from an exact science. Sure, there's a bunch of physiology and sports science in how we develop responsiveness to training stimulus, but a lot of it is also attitude and mindset and growing the soil, or nurturing the soil that you grow world-class talent in, and that is really an often neglected piece of coach education, and that filters right now. It's not just elite squads, that filters through most sports at most levels, and it's a shame.
Right, and there's so much evidence that's the kind of the stuff that matters, right? That the spreadsheets and the algorithms, maybe somebody has an insight that they keep to themselves for a couple of years, but eventually that spreads. But the teams or the players that end up doing really well, or the individual performers, are those who can get their heads on straight, who can do the 3 things that you talk about in the book, with the images of the bandaged heart, the wings, and the sword.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and some athletes find that sort of somewhat organically, like Lesley did. I mean, I helped, obviously, but there are lots of athletes like Lesley who get to the place where they're finally able to find their own identity and their own journey through it. Others, unfortunately, drop out of the sport because they just get so sick and tired of how they're either treated, or they might not even have the ability to know that that's what it is. They just feel that they've fallen out of love with the sport, or it's become too XYZ for them, and then they stop it altogether. And then you've got the other athletes, sort of the Rudy syndrome, which is, these athletes who are, on paper anyway, they don't stack up against what talent ID programs tell us that is needed to be at the top level, but they've got an incredible heart. So it's a big debate, like which is more important. But certainly there's no debate over that we should be nurturing both if we want to get the best athletic, to find the best athletic selves or reach our potential. And unfortunately, most of the evidence suggests at the moment is skewed heavily in favor of just looking at, the quantifiable metrics of training stress and training stimulus and coaching, drills, protocols and methods, rather than how that you nurture mindset.
And my guess is, you start the book with a quote that I love, which is, "We should all do stuff that scares us, however small, and this takes a very personal form of courage." And my guess is that one of the reasons that coaches don't give the kind of empathetic, compassionate feedback is that it's scary to engage with another person on a human level as opposed to just handing them an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, I mean, the head of, not just heads of athletes, the heads of people, I mean, they're a black box, right? And they're pretty scary things. And you often find stuff that's dark and you don't know how to cope with it. But that doesn't mean, and even if you don't have the training to do that, it doesn't mean that conversation isn't worth having, because just having, the ability to empathize, which is something that it should be a human virtue that we should all be trying to develop and learn, doesn't require any detailed skill or psychological insight. It means that you try and you put yourself in someone else's shoes, and rather than just simply judge or instruct or lecture or teach, understand that having those discussions, learning just the basic skills of empathy are a huge step forward. And even if you don't go much beyond that, using some mental skills or other psychological insights or strategies, just having that built, the way that you build trust is a good way to shift mindset. So learning empathy skills is a fantastic start.
Right. And there's something so beautiful about using athletics to turn yourself into the kind of human being that you aspire to be. Like, you can do it through, touchy-feely stuff or leadership development or personal development at work. But there's something really nice about having both the mental and emotional intelligence and the practice, but also having these really clear results. Right.
Yeah, I think having structure and accountability and goals, are wonderful things to set you straight in other areas of your life. But moreover, I think what sport allows us to do is look deep into our soul and that of our training partners as well. Because when you're going through pain, you're at your most vulnerable, and that's when you get your biggest discoveries. And so it's a kind of artificial way of creating that, that level of, pulling back the curtain on who you really are. Yeah. And then not only that, developing these wonderful friendships with other people that are there with you when you're doing it. And it creates an everlasting bond.
It's funny because, at the beginning of the book, you talk a lot about our 3-pound lump of crazy, excuse me, our brain that has evolved for a very different world than we live in now, where there's saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths and all sorts of dangers. In a sense, that doing athletics is kind of as close as it makes sense to put ourselves back into that world. Yep,
and if you look at all of the races now, you've got all of the ultra runs, that are incredibly challenging, and all of through all of this amazing terrain. You've got things like Spartan and obstacle racing, and everything's about getting back to that visceral response to the world, because we've lost touch of it, with, media, social media, computers, and just the way that we connect with other people now. It feels like it's the only way to really get back to the basics.
And some sports sociologists and philosophers have written about this as well. I mean, we're in the world of triathlon but we've, and other endurance sports, and there's no denying that there's a strong socioeconomic gradient to this, right? They're expensive sports, and one of the conclusions has been that part of this trend that we're seeing to try and to find activities that are harder and more challenging, whether it's through Ironman or ultra running, is that somehow we've lost a sense of suffering, and this isn't to trivialize that many people who do these sports are suffering in many other areas of their life as well, but it's this notion that why are we drawn to try and create opportunities to test our boundaries or our limits? Why are we drawn to environments that are going to make us suffer? Well, clearly we learn something about ourselves through doing that.
Perhaps, we now have desk jobs, or we're knowledge workers. We don't have, and so maybe it's what's the appeal of finding sports or activities that are continually pushing our limits? And what's is there some existential reason we do that? And again, it's not to trivialize the fact that lots of people have lots of suffering in their lives already, but certainly when you look at the socioeconomic gradient of some of these endurance sports, it's usually fairly, white middle class men and women that are doing them. Then maybe there's something about that we need some sorts of suffering in our lives to learn something about ourselves.
Right. And that's one of the challenges that I have when I'm coaching these new people who, it's sort of a bait and switch. Like I'm telling them, one thing, and then at a certain point they realize, oh, this is going to require effort and what we call vitamin P, like, pain, like actually, that we're deficient in some way if we're not getting that. And people, there's some people, I guess, like Lesley and the ultra endurance community that understand that we can thrive on this. But most people, when they think about that, like, the comments I get when I say, oh, I just ran a marathon, or I'm training for a 50K, most of the others with a capital O, the civilians, look at me like, you must be crazy.
Yeah, I think, and that's where you have to, start off super, super small, and realize that there's amazing achievement in completing your first 5K walk, and sort of and bolstering achievements as you go along, and making sure that the environment that a person is in is supportive of that, so they're around other people that are going through that same journey too. There's no point in putting a regular civilian, as you would like to call it, in with someone that's a 50K runner and expect them to feel okay about it. Chances are they won't. But if you put them in a group of other people that are all trying to do the same thing, then they're going to bond over it. They're going to achieve things, and whatnot. So so it's just all dependent on how you pitch it.
So let's talk about the main metaphor of the book, which is the three parts of the brain: the chimp, the professor, and the computer. So what do you mean by these, and how can we use them to become braver athletes?
Yeah, so I mean, we have to make some assumptions and simplifications here, because the what we now know about the structure and function of the brain is far more complex than reducing it to three caricatures, right? But the bottom line is that for athletes and humans who are trying to struggle with everyday thoughts and things that they don't want, is that we need something that helps us. So something that's tangible. So wading through, detailed neuroscientific journal articles is not really going to give you the answers to help you, ask for a pay raise tomorrow, or feel confident to enter a race that you've never done before, or so on. And so what we now think of, and then it's not just us that have done this. Many psychologists, sports psychologists, and other authors have also made distinctions between parts of our brain that seem to have different roles. And again, one of the simplifications here from the science is that we kind of conflate the structure from the function part. We actually know that certain tasks aren't exclusively located in certain areas of the brain. But if you can sort of let some of those sort of scientific consistency with the scientific research, if you can just let some of those things slide, in the sense that it doesn't fight against the biological reality of what we know, but it isn't entirely consistent with it, because we're looking for practical strategies. We know that, the limbic system, the part of our brain that's the oldest, deep in the center, that has places like that has in it
things like the amygdala and hippocampus and all these other sort of Latin names that we might have heard of, that it's the center of our emotional world. That's where our emotions come from. That's where the fight or flight response comes from. That's where our pain and fear is often processed. And that part of our brain, we know, is a kind of reactive, impulsive, emotional machine. It doesn't actually think the way that you think of thinking. So, when you think of all the things that you like doing and you figure out, what house you want to live in and how much you're getting paid, and you're doing math in your head, and that's not the part of our brain that's doing that heavy lifting. The part that's trying to get you out of harm's way and to keep you alive is the limbic system. So we and others have called this a chimp, because a chimp is a sort of a nice metaphor, because it implies, it's a kind of an immature primate that both can have tantrums. It can convince us, just as a 2-year-old having a tantrum in the middle of a grocery store can. We need to use all of our techniques to say that the world isn't ending as you know it, and how do we try and calm that part of ourselves down? But the part of us who makes rational decisions, what we call the professor brain, the wrinkly part, the frontal cortex. So those two brains are really the source of a lot of the fights that go on in our own head. So the voice of I don't feel good enough, I don't feel worthy enough, and all the other things, I don't want to be embarrassed, or I'm just scared I'm going to get eaten by a shark, they're all coming from the limbic system. But our professor brain is saying, oh, it's just a race, just enjoy it, of course, don't worry about it. And you're having this fight inside your own head. And we know which one often wins that, and it's the limbic system, the chimp, and it's been biologically sort of wired to win that fight. And it does it a number of ways, one of which it processes information from our senses about 5 times quicker than our frontal cortex. So our limbic system, and our amygdala in particular, is paying attention to all the sensory information, our ears and our eyes and our touch, and it's processing them so quickly and setting off a cascade of hormonal and biochemical changes in our body that get us to react in a certain way. And then meanwhile, our professor brain, our rational thinking brain, is sort of now already behind the 8 ball a bit. So you're nervous, your palms are sweating, you feel a bit nauseous, but it's just a race, but you feel overpowered by these physical reactions. So that reason is because your chimp brain has already been able to set off this cascade of reactions before your professor brain's had something to do about it. And then the other thing is that when it does detect some stress, or stressors, I should say, some threat cues, as psychologists say, is that it throws a chemical brick at your frontal cortex. So about 30 neurotransmitters are released that stop your rational thinking professor brain try to think your way out of a potentially life and death situation. And that, again, that's for a good measure, right? We don't want to be able to we can't be relied on to sort of say, well, is that something that could actually kill me? Let me go and check it out. No, you need to be primed. Your body needs to be primed to run, to hide, or to fight as quick as possible. So most of our mental anguish is because it ultimately reflects these two fights between our brain, what emotionally, instinctively, viscerally we feel, yet what we actually think intellectually we want to do or we ought to do. And then the computer brain is sort of a metaphor to suggest that much of our world also lives on autopilots or habits. We'd be overwhelmed if we had to cognitively process every decision that we have to make in life, whether it's just walking downstairs, how to open a door, or how to drive. We learn these things, and then once they become habits, they can kind of get almost like stored in a part of our brain that doesn't have to think too much about it, which is why we can hold a conversation and drive at the same time, just not on a hands-free kit, I should say. So our computer brain, when we start to run and also draw, and that's the quickest brain of all, in fact. So when you're in a stressful situation, yes, these threat cues are being processed from your chimp brain, your limbic system, but then your computer brain also provides access to our memory banks and says, oh yes, you've been in this situation before and it didn't end well. You don't do well when these people are there, or when the weather's like this, or when the waves come at you like this, and so on. So now we have the emotions that are also getting fueled by memories. And so those two things then almost can team up. And we become now our slow, lazy professor brain is now so puny that it can't put up much of a fight. So one of the the tricks to trying to turn that tide so that our professor brains can be in charge is to kind of intercept those habits and routines and try and almost replace them, and also have good memories to say, well, actually, when this happens, or when I've been in that situation in the past, it isn't as catastrophic as I'm imagining, or my chimp and my computer brains are leading me to believe, to kind of dissect some of those thoughts with rational thinking. And that's often the hallmark of a lot of psychotherapy. For example, cognitive behavioral therapy is essentially, that's what it's doing. It's trying to intercept sort of irrational, emotive states with more rational, logical thinking and confronting that. And so that's really why we like this little triad of understanding the voices that you have. It's not the real you. The chimp brain, the limbic system, isn't the real you. It's your professor brain is the real you. So when it shows up and tries to convince you that you're going to be humiliated out there, or you're going to look, everyone's going to be staring at how fat you are in your lycra, those reactions are simply trying to protect you from harm, physical harm or psychological harm, and they come from the limbic system. So the goal there is to try and, that we've got this, chimp, don't worry, this has happened, we know how to deal with it, we know that most of the things that you're worried about are not going to come true, and those that could come true, nothing really matters even if they do, the so what question. So we try and get athletes to think of this as a debate within their own head, so that they don't always get hijacked by their chimp brain under stressful situations.
So see if I can understand this, that one of the tricks we can use is to sort of pre-load the computer brain with desired thoughts and scenarios and action plans, so that it even beats out the chimp, in that we're in a certain situation.
Well, yeah, in a way, what we're trying to do, we're trying to replace it with other habits, right? So this is one of the reasons that we think about the role of suffering, or the role of being brave. Like, you have these thoughts and feelings and you did it anyway, and look, the world still turns, you survived it. And so the more you do that, the more you're laying down some habits and memories that are drawn, that then get summoned up when you're in that situation again. So it's partly, we have to force ourselves to be in situations that make us feel uncomfortable, to learn firsthand that life goes on and your world didn't end and you never got ridiculed or laughed at or humiliated. And then once you start to learn that that's the goal of those experiences, you then start to see how important it is to put yourselves in situations and look forward to situations that actually create those circumstances, because that's how you actually become a brave athlete. That's how you become mentally tougher. That's how you become more enduring. That's how your chimp realizes that your world doesn't end when you're in those situations. Because otherwise, if you let it win out and fear remains, you just retreat from moments that, or situations that scare you. You live in a comfort zone, and that's not how we develop. As humans.
I love that, because it's, in my experience, in the experience of almost everyone I've ever talked to, it's, most of us know what to do most of the time, and we don't do it because we're afraid of how it's going to make us feel, right? The conversation that we don't want to have, or I'm going to put out this blog post because I think it's going to get me some attention and it's going to say something important, but we can, I can hide that file on my computer for years. I can never have the conversation, and it's not to protect the other person, it's to protect me.
Yes, and I think that it's, I can say this after writing a book about it, that you can't even learn this stuff from a book. You have to, our message is, change your relationship with failure, redefine what failure is, learn to see it as an opportunity, as guidance. It's a bit like, and I often use the analogy of, some athletes are so terrified about putting themselves in these situations that they need to feel successful. It must go perfectly first time. And I use the analogy, if you turn on the shower and before you get in, you try and test the temperature. So you stick your hand in and you adjust the hot or the cold, so it's just about right. That's what these situations are. So rather than seeing it as a failure that you didn't compete, or you didn't get the time you wanted, or you were in there and you didn't do as well as you wanted, see it like you're just putting your hand in the shower, so that you can dial in the situation, so you can dial in your training, your preparation, your mindset, so that you can reach your potential. And when you have a fundamental shift in how you see failure, you start to, and we have a phrase for it, and again, excuse our swearing here, it's called finding your fuck it moment. When, you say, fuck it, what's the worst that could happen? So what? And when you can start to enter yourselves in those situations. And we all know people who just seem to be like that anyway, and we're so envious of them. But you can teach yourself to be like that by forcing yourself to fail a lot and not be so concerned about what that failure is telling about you as a person, and more about your actions and how you can prepare differently.
That's beautiful. And I'm wondering, Lesley, how that plays out when there are real, quote, real stakes, when, if I enter a race and, no one's expecting me to do anything, and I, come in 10 minutes slower than my goal, like, who cares? But if you're racing professionally and sponsorships are on the line and, your career, can you find fuck it moments within that, or is it harder?
Definitely. I think you have to focus on the process rather than the outcome. So, I have process goals in any given race. So by that I mean things like whether it's athletic form, whether it's cadence on the bike, whether it's a positive attitude, whether it's getting my nutrition right. I come up with kind of a list of, say, 10 or 15 process goals that I want to achieve in a race. And it's not about outcome, because there's so many things that can go wrong. And there's no doubt that, hey, you have a bad race and you don't do what you want to do, that you're frustrated and disappointed. But I think that you have enough things in place to make you feel positive about knowing why it went wrong and seeing that as an opportunity to grow and learn rather than, sort of getting all bogged down by it.
Yeah, and nothing really hinges on a single race, ever. I mean, you could take the most high-stakes environment that you're an Olympic qualifying slot and you must get this time or whatever. But when you look in the context of an athletic career or even a season, none of those things are actually completely defining if you don't meet them. And so, this again comes back to when the cards are dealt the way they've been dealt on race morning or the morning of something that you're terrified of, and they are what they are. If you can't change them on the day, then you just have to deal with them. But the two things that are always in your control, always, is your effort and your attitude. And so what we try and do is have athletes only when they do their post-race autopsy. That's the standard that we're holding them to. So, missing a podium slot because you got overtaken in the finishing chute or someone, there were faster people than you on the day, none of that is in your control. But what is in your control, that you kind of threw the towel in mentally and you kind of didn't give everything that you could give. You didn't really squeeze that sponge out. So effort and attitude are the only two things that you can control. And when you go into races with that mindset, to have your best outcomes. And that's the paradox, right, of all of this, is that the way to get the best outcome, the one that you secretly want, and listen, let's not pretend that outcomes not important. They are, of course they are. But the paradox is that the way to get the outcome you want is to not focus on it. It's to focus on the things that get you the outcome. And that's the process.
Oh, I love that. So one of the things you talk about is there's 7 attributes of a mature athletic identity, and I was reading my notes into Google Keep, which was transcribing them for me, and when I read this one, it changed a mature into amateur athletic identity, which I thought was really interesting. But what can you talk about some of those things? Like, what do you mean by mature athletic identity, and how do I know if I have one?
Yeah, so and this is now in the realm of the psychology of identity and what it is, the thoughts and beliefs that we have about who we are and the roles that we play, and we know that our identities feed into what psychologists call our self-concept, right? How some global statements about the kind of person we are. And then all the identities, the hats that we wear in life as a partner, as an employee, or a business owner, as a parent, as an athlete, they all feed into that self-concept. So all of these things about our athletic identity are equally true for all the other identities that we have as well. And when you have multiple identities, meaning not in a dissociative personality disorder way, but when you have multiple identities, meaning you wear a lot of hats in your life, that we know that's an important and healthy contributor to self-concept. So think of it like an investment portfolio. If all of your stocks are in one shares are in one particular stock, if that goes, you're kind of up shit creek, right? And it's the same. If you become only an athlete, and to the extent that all other aspects of your life, you withdraw from relationships, you're no longer, you don't have a few friends. This goes for, you could substitute workaholic for this anywhere. Then we know that if you have a career-ending injury or an illness that stops you doing that, then you better be prepared for some dark times ahead, because your self-concept that is the main pipeline, your identity that's the main pipeline to your concept, is now starting to chip away at how you feel about your worth as a person. So what we try and do is encourage athletes to have multiple things that they're interested in. You can make the case for why we are, absolutely opposed to having high levels of specialization for kids in sport. Leslie's the same as a professional athlete. She's always had a lot of other things going on and enjoyed other things. And some coaches, back to how we started this discussion, you need to take this more seriously. You need to give up these other things, and not realizing that that's how her identity survives the ups and downs of the injuries and the illnesses that come with it. So once you get down into the individual identity level and you start, like you said, you start to think about what it takes. So one of the things is about, are you, we call it mature rather than a strong athletic identity. And we don't say strong because some people who have lost other identities at the expense of their athleticism, they might say your athletic identity, that's all you live and breathe this now. You could say, well, that's very strong. It's so powerful. But that actually isn't healthy. So we prefer the word mature, which is more of a well-balanced approach, or a well-balanced sort of spread across the hats that you wear. So, for example, we want people to feel comfortable being able to talk about their athleticism, owning their athleticism. So if you're doing your first 5K and you're speaking to someone who is an accomplished athlete or just been doing it a long time, and you have a tendency to sort of excuse how slow you are because, of course, they wouldn't. It's not as fast as them, or I'm just a so-and-so. That's not taking ownership of where you're at in the sport. So a sign of a mature athletic identity is to take ownership of wherever you're at, however fast or slow you are, and not make excuses for that. It's a product of how much time you put in, how important it is to you, and so on. So that's just one example of how we try and build those conversations with athletes. And trying to stop them using the justers. I'm just to this, or I'm just to that, or we're coaches, right? And the number of athletes that we have saying, "Do you coach people as slow as me? Do you only coach fast people?" That speaks volumes about how they see their own athletic identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's I think you talk about the chimp doesn't want to be embarrassed, humiliated, and it's a kind of preemptive strike. Right? That if I tell you how badly I suck, then you've got nothing.
Exactly. And you remember, your chimp is actually trying to protect you. So you might think that your chimp is just being, is sabotaging everything that you want to do in life. But your chimp is trying to get you away from situations that are going to kill you. So that's a noble cause. But the other things is that it doesn't want you to feel that the sort of the holy trinity of the psychological death, the equivalent, is embarrassment, humiliation, and inadequacy. Because years ago, millions of years ago, being in environments where that happened did actually mean death, because you were isolated from your troop, you had to forage food for yourself, you had to defend yourself. But nowadays, those things are just these little artifacts that don't actually matter that much if we look like a complete idiot in front of other people, right? The world still turns, and that goes on. So your chimp, when you have these feelings, your chimp is trying to get you to convince you, you don't do something you're good at. Why are you doing this? Or don't worry, there'll be another day. Do it later. You don't have to do this now. It's trying to persuade you to not put yourselves in situations where that potential risk of humiliation, embarrassment, inadequacy, it happens. And that's what we've got to really confront.
Right. So there's so much to talk about, but, I've taken a lot of your time. I would love for you to share a little bit about what I think is my favorite feature in the book, which are the meme turds. These things that we see on Facebook and Instagram that are supposed to be sort of wise and encouraging, and you say are scientifically not valid or gross oversimplifications or misunderstood. Can you talk about a few of those?
Yeah. I mean, this whole, I don't know if you're familiar with Motivational Monday. There's even days now assigned to that. You get on the Monday, you get the little meme that comes around with some sort of words of inspiration, vacuous and sufficiently vague to sound sort of deeply philosophical. And often some of them, let's take, confidence is a great one to begin with. And there's so many memes that kind of convince you that, what's stopping you become the person that you really want to be is to, don't compare yourself to others. If you just think it hard enough, you can become that person, dream it and it will be, and that kind of stuff. And we know that that's nonsense. I mean, the psychological science has spoken on so many of those issues about how you find confidence, how you build resilience, how you compare and judge yourself to others. It's perfectly normal, for example, to want to know how you're doing relative to others. So to expect people to just say, never compare yourself to others, it's just not only fighting the biological reality of it, it's extremely naive. We've never met anyone that's able to do that. And even if you try to do it long enough, eventually you'll give in. You can't help, because that helps us figure out where we sit in that pecking order. That's a biological drive to survive. Well, so it's knowing how to filter.
Yeah. So yeah. Also, if you're entering a race, I'm suddenly thinking about that video that made everybody cry, including me, a few years ago. I think it was a Special Olympics where it was a 100-meter dash and somebody fell, and all the participants came back and they just sort of held hands and walked across the finish line. And there is something sort of beautiful and noble about that, but it doesn't invalidate the fact that I enter a race to compare myself to other people. And as I'm approaching the last 2 or 3 miles, everybody in front of me has an X on their back, and I'm like, I'm going to pass you, fucker. Like,
yeah, and it's funny because using that example is a great one, because we have a lot of athletes who have what we call a participant mindset versus a competitor mindset. And they enter races, I'm just doing it for fun, we're not arguing with that. I doesn't really care how I do, and I'm just going to go do it. And some of them, the very few of them actually genuinely think that deep down. But most of them, in our experience, do that because it gives them a way out if things don't go well. I'm just doing it for fun. It's not that important anyway. And we know that humans are competitive by nature. Our brains are wired to compare how we're doing relative to other people. Take any task, and there'll be our brains will find a way to sort of make a competition out of it. So to fight that is also kind of to kind of miss the point. Now far be it from us, because we love a good emotional, teary video as best of other, like the rest of us. But that's not what we're saying. We're saying see them for what they are, and they're like think of them like they're sort of getting into a warm bath. It feels great. You can whip up this emotional chimp reaction, but it soon goes cold, and it doesn't have any long-lasting impact on how you deal with situations in the future. They might be great for what we call cognitive priming, it gets you into a mindset or a readiness to do something. But in terms of a long-lasting skill to build confidence, to build athletic identity, could rattle off a whole host of those, they don't actually do anything. So just to recognize that that's what they are.
Right, and some of them are just plain harmful, right?
Yeah, well, particularly when it comes to, ones that are built around social comparison. And, we could talk about, there are some that are related to body shape, some that are related to, identity, some are related to confidence. Some of them aren't just, it might be a stretch to say they're harmful, but they're not productive. Put it that way. So I think that it's starting. Listen, it takes hard work to have a fundamental shift in how we think and feel about ourselves. It isn't going to come from a 20-second Under Armour commercial on YouTube. But there are some things in there that make us feel good, and we like them. It might spur something in us to try something, but don't rely on it to have a fundamental shift in how you think and feel on a daily basis.
Right, and a lot of them, when I read some of them, I'm like, yeah, I believe that. And of course, if it doesn't get operationalized, then you're living in your warm bath. Like the set a goal so big.
It doesn't give you anything that you can actually use, right, to get better. It just tells you what it's kind of like a little bit. It's like a photograph, right? Okay, I can see what's going on. Yes, I can appreciate it. It doesn't tell me anything about how to actually take the picture or how to get better as a photographer. And so that's what we think. That's where some of these strategies are trying to do. They're trying to kind of unlock some of the thinking behind what is holding you back or stopping you do things that scare you, and how that you can start to approach those with a little bit more than just relying on, the internet.
Right. I'm reminded of one of my favorite authors is Terry Pratchett, who one of his books said, if you trust in yourself and believe in your dreams and follow your star, you'll still get beaten by people who spent their time working hard and learning things and weren't so lazy.
I know, right? Yeah, I know. It could be a dream crush. There's a whole, we could talk about the failed self-esteem movement from the 60s and 70s, and how it's led through, parenting now, and how there's a participation culture and effort is the only thing that matters culture, and how ultimately we're doing a gross disservice to the children that we're nurturing in doing that, rather than letting them fail and letting them be exposed to competition and so on. So that's a whole other debate, but that gets exactly at those issues.
So before I let you go, who do you work with? Who's listening to this would want to work with you? I know you have a product that I almost signed up for today, but my back was hurting too much. The 6 minutes six pack.
Yeah, that's
right. That's our endurance video that we did for a core routine for endurance athletes. So it was pretty fun. We recorded it all together. I put Simon through pain and torture to get that video, but yeah, you could certainly sign up for that. But in terms of the people that we work with, it really runs the gamut, to be honest. As long as you have passion for change and for sport, then we're up for coaching you. It might be for your first 5K, or it might be as a professional Ironman athlete. So we work with everyone, to be honest.
So for clearly someone who's sensed that their head has gotten in their way and they haven't achieved their potential at some professional or semi-pro level, but someone who understands that this athletic pursuit is a metaphor for everything else that they want to achieve and want to become in their life, right? Because I kept reading the book thinking, in fact, I want to give this to people who have no athletic interest, because it's a field guide for human development.
And that's actually the little, don't tell anybody that this is a stealth approach, right? Because these are life skills, let's face it. Coping with thoughts and things you don't want, doing stuff that scares you, stepping out of your comfort zone. We just happen to be discussing them about in a sports environment, but they work in multiple environments. And I'd say that probably like 5% of the people we work with are the top elite professionals who are trying to get their mental edge. It's the majority of people are folks who are just struggling, juggling, plate spinning with life, trying to pursue sport and get the most out of it without actually giving themselves undue anxiety, stress, or panic attacks along the way. And so that we can start to get into situations a little bit more where we can find those fuck it moments for everybody, because they're great when they happen and they feel so amazing, but you have to learn how to do them.
I love that. And where on the web can folks find you?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, braveheartcoach.com. You can actually you can fill out our smog test, which is a little questionnaire, answer questions, and I'll give you a phone call, no strings attached, and chat through your training and talk about certainly what coaching we offer, but just have a chat with you. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, yeah, go ahead, son.
And the book and the audio book you can get on Amazon and Audible and stuff as well.
Right, and the book is called The Brave Athlete, Calm the Something Down and Rise to the Occasion. And Simon and Lesley, it was such a joy to read this book, to feel like I got an infusion of your spirit and humor through the words, and now increasing the bandwidth and getting to talk to you guys. It's a huge honor and a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thanks, Howard, so much.
All right. Take care, you guys. All right. What'd you think of that? When you're listening to it now, knowing that in hindsight, Lesley's going to become a award-winning screenwriter, did you get anything new from it? I know I did. So let's talk about running news, movement news. It's been a sad little week in Lake Wobegon. My back went out on Monday a week ago. Today's Wednesday, so it's been 9 days. And I'm only now starting to feel better, so I'm worried about the kind of cardio shape I'm going to be in for 1 month from now, the tournament in New Orleans. And I don't exactly know how to thread the needle in terms of really, when I get better, getting my cardio back before just, burning out before the tournament. So I'm going to have to play that by ear and maybe accept the fact that I won't be as energetic and have as much stamina as I would like to have and as I think of myself as having. In garden news, not much going on. It's been, crazy warm here last week, and it rained a couple times. So the weeds are doing very well. And we're getting ready to think about what we're going to be planting. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song Sabali Dawn, The Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Tina Scharf, Tina Ahern, Jen Filikanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious Michelle X, Elsbeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Kelly Cameron, Janet Selby, Claire Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Bennett, Gila Sert, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizov, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Val Linneman, Nick Harper, Bandana Chawley, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable, Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Scharf, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Copel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Sharon Hirschman, Linda Ayat, Holm Hedegaard, Isa Tuzinwa, Connie Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Olakoski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Marani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Ann Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Peter W. Evans, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Laurie Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Emily Iconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan Picorni, Stephen Leenan, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Kartz, Deanne Bishop, Bilberry Elf, Marjorie Lewis, Tricia Adams, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunmarie Hagan, Tracy Gullidge, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Paranganchi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Naik, Erica Piedra, Danielle Roberts, Michael Lushton, Sarah Johnson, Catherine Floyd, for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for now. As always, be well, my friends.